I don't just wear this hat. I wear a lot of hats in myself.
It's a lot.
And I moved out here to have some freedom and space. We had to control burn on quite a bit of it this year.
How often?
About
do you
every
do
2
that?
years.
Every 2 years.
Depends. This one we do the front half one year and the back half the other. This time we did the front, and it's already popping back to life.
Yeah,
It really is.
It's amazing what happens.
We have a whole army of young people here with all kinds of little squirt things, and
That's
they
fabulous.
light her up, and I leave for a day or two to come back.
Y'all watch Fred. Watch out, Fred. Yeah, that's it.
All right, I gotta announce one thing. Anybody that steps into dog poop, it ain't my fault. Burn the brush.
Watch where you walk. I think I should have a bag in my pocket. I can give it to you. I walk with one.
This is St. James-Santee Parish Episcopal Church, sometimes known as Brick Church because it's the first brick building to serve the parish. Our parish is St. James-Santee Parish, and we're the second oldest parish in the state. Only downtown Charleston's a little older than we are. And they don't let us forget it either.
I bet.
But we've been around for a long time. Today, the busiest spot in the parish is McClellanville. It's growing, but when this parish was settled, there were a group of French who had settled up the Santee River, and they wanted a little political power. Their numbers were growing, and they wanted a vote on what was happening to them. And so they became a parish, and a lot of those men stepped into power into the Charleston community before there was even a state yet. But we have along the Santee some of the homes left behind by the early settlers here. Down on this end was primarily English and Scot-Irish. On that end was French. Then the French moved down this way a little bit, and then they started marrying one another. And I don't know exactly what kind of mutt they are, but
I'm one of them.
they got along pretty good, apparently. And you got all these English and Scot-Irish, and they got French names, so first names and middle names, and it gets kind of confusing when you start to outline the family, because their family trees is more like kudzu. They just go around and around and around. They kept that money in the family. The French that came and settled here, I'll tell you a little bit while we're waiting. I'll give them a little bit more time to get here. They left their country because of persecution there, because of their religion. Went to England and found out they weren't welcome there. And the king said, I'll put you on a boat and send you to America free of charge, won't cost you a dime. And so they signed up for that, and they came into Charleston. And in Charleston, they were known as those French. And the question asked was, what do we do with those French? Because a lot of those French had trades just like the people, the English, who had already been sent to Charleston. And they didn't want any competition, so they all got together and they voted those French out of Charleston. And they put them up on the Santee. There's a little town called Jamestown today, where their Jamestown settlement was placed. And y'all, I often envision some of my relatives, I got some of their blood in me, and being young men and women with children, they come into Charleston and they're not wanted there, so they're kicked out up here. She and the children stayed in Charleston for a while. The husband and the other boys go up there, and you know what they're seeing? There isn't a plantation for them to move their families into. Not a house was anywhere. They were looking at a forest, 10 times thicker than what you see across the street over there. trees that had never, ever, ever, ever been cut. And you know what their job was? To cut them.
Right.
Because they needed to clear fields for farming, and they needed timber for houses. It was a horrible nightmare to be out there. One lady wrote about the event that it was almost 60 or 90 days before they saw a loaf of bread. And that's pretty strong. With their help among their little community, they managed to put up some lean-tos. The first nights they actually had stolen some sails from down at the Charleston waterfront and strung them between trees for lean-tos. And then here comes the wife and kids, and they've got little shacks that they've thrown up, and for a while that was home. And the people that actually saved their lives and helped them survive were the Native Americans that were living in the community. It was their community. It was their woods. And so these young people were actually saved by Siouxsie or Santee Indians, depends on which one was there. We don't know for sure. But they taught them how to fish and what was available in the woods for them to kill and to cook and how to process it and everything. You know, there was a lot of learning, and you had to learn fast. You better be a quick learner or you starve to death. And so when I hear people saying, my family were some of those Huguenots that settled here. Huguenots settled up in North Carolina and all kinds of different places, but ours were right down the river there, and they were all superior group of young people. They survived. I've never read where somebody starved to death or something horrible like that, but they kept their heads down and they did good. And we always think of the Huguenots and the Scot-Irish from up here being men sitting on horseback, riding up and down the fields, watching the slaves planting things. That did happen, but it was later. The people down in the fields were them. The first generation or so eked out a living, and then they started prospering and doing well, and eventually became some of the richest people in South Carolina, perhaps the nation. The Manago family was one of the richest in the United States at one time. So we got them up on the river, and here comes your friends, I think, or somebody, or two strangers, one or the other. Columns to start to collapse on us. We have a committee that kind of governs what happens to the place. We raise funds for it. The church that we'll see when we leave here owns this, but they have a small congregation and don't have the money to take care of both buildings, so a nonprofit was formed underneath that church some about 30 or 40 years ago. We all got together, and Bo Morrison led the charge. He was a Charleston attorney. His daddy was the mayor of Charleston for a while. And then Agnes Baldwin and a few other crops living along the Santee. Eliza Lucas Pinckney, who gave us indigo, lived up here at Hampton with their daughter, who had married an Ori, one of them French people. And they had a guest one morning for breakfast, and it was George Washington, the first president of the United States. He came to Georgetown, stayed there a little while, crossed the river, came over to Eliza's son's house at Fairfield, visited him, came to Hampton, had breakfast, came here, and a group was gathered to receive him. And he spent a few minutes here and then got in a buggy on that old road and went into Allendale to Mr. Manago's barony. He didn't have a plantation. His was a big old chunk called a barony. And he spent the night there. He left there. He went to Charles Copesworth Pinckney's house and spent the night with him. And then he went into Charleston. It took him 3 days to get from Georgetown to Charleston. Now, I don't know how long it took him to get back to Philadelphia.
There's a book
But-
called Travels with George that talks about it.
Hmm?
There's a book, it's called Travels.
But that road can torture you. It is so dusty sometimes, and it is so muddy sometimes. Down that way, when you're leaving civilization where Dirty Dan used to live, I came to a mud puddle that was all the way across the road at 9 o'clock at night one night. It went all the way across. You couldn't see the grass on either side. You didn't see any grass in the hump in the middle of the road. And I dropped down in the second with my little Ford Ranger pickup truck. And I said, I can make it through that. That ain't no big deal. I've been through worse than that. You know when that puddle stopped? I mean, I went from high spot to high spot, and my heart was bounding, and I'm just praying and bogged down and hardly moved. Right there, in the middle of that fence, is where it quit. And when I got Charleston County Road 1, that's its official designation. It's the first road in all of Charleston County. That was a Indian path. We came along and widened it so a couple of wagons or a couple of coaches could pass. So it's never been widened any great amount. Cars still have to move over and let one go by. But I'm proud to say that is on the National Register today, because of the Restoration Committee of this church got it placed on there. And I made the pitch to the people in Columbia to do that. They didn't do a lot of roads. And the thing that got it on the register was the importance of this. People can get out here safely, and so 6.2 miles was put on the National Register. It's now protected. It can never be paved. It can never be widened. They grade it, and that's about it. So when you're riding on that, think of all of the amazing people that came before you, that came up here to visit family, and they went all around the world doing amazing things. I then, over time, it went from Anglican to Episcopalian, which this church was in its heyday. The little chapel we're going to this afternoon is a chapel of ease to this church. It's a church that is more convenient to worship in than the mother church. McClellanville was becoming a town, and my great-great-granddaddy, Dr. William Thomas Wilkins Baker, a man so amazing they named him 19 times, he saw the village growing, and people were coming in and settling in and building homes. He said, we've got to have a church here. You just can't worship, and you can't go for weeks without worshiping. And so he got the ladies of town together, and they raised $560. And he got that church built for that. All of the bids, the 3 bids they got on it, were all much higher. The lowest one was $785, and that was Paul Drayton's bid. He was a black man who had been freed and came to McClellanville, married a local girl, did real well for himself. He built the Episcopal Church, the Presbyterian Church, and the AME Church, and a lot of the houses that you'll see in town. He was the man leading the construction crew. Pretty amazing guy. Dr. Baker, my relative, was elected to the State House of Representatives.
So he was from the Drayton.
Yep.
Drayton Plantation.
Right down, it's yours.
And watch your step.
Watch your step, up and down.
You can trip.
And if you do trip and fall now, I got to drag you out to the road out there.
You okay? Yep. All right, just watching everybody.
Now, it'll be a little bit dark in here because we don't have any electricity. We never will. We need some for the service for microphones and such. We run a cord from the power back to the outhouses. But we like it to be as original as possible. This church, like any other church, has gone through change. The configuration you see here is not what it began with. On the back side of the building back there was an identical entrance just like we came in. A little portico of brick, the doors that open double like this. They survived. There came a time when the population upriver had moved down far enough, they abandoned the roadway that took them up to Jamestown and started coming up this road. So the church decided everything was pointing towards that end. They had a long shelf along the wall there for worshiping, whatever. And they reconfigured things. They blocked off some, between the columns there was some brick. Everything was thought out, and it worked. It's still the same way. When you look at these pews, you'll see that the panels don't line up quite right with the next one. That's because that reconfiguration was all facing this way, now they face this way, that way. And everybody that comes in here always says, how can you see the minister when you're sitting in that box? You can't see over the wall. Well, I invite you to open a door and sit down, because you can. There are a few that have the configuration like this. In a Sunday service, your neighbors come down and do 2 or 3 days in advance.
But you gotta sit up straight, else you
Right.
Enjoyed the service, then went back to the plantation. They stayed for another 2 or 3 days. These were cousins and friends in the West Grove. And I'm kind of happy. I kind of had the idea to do that. When you're sitting in these places, you and your husband would sit there. Your mama, being there, the one there in the room, your mama would be sitting beside y'all, because that's where you got the land from. You married that other girl, so you could get the land. And then all those guests that came from higher up the river lined up along here. And then all of the children lined up on this board facing mom and daddy. And if you sit there and you reach out, you'll know it's exactly the proper distance for maintaining control. Little girls came with a church dog, something to keep them occupied. Little boys just had to sit and shut up. And shutting up was the reason for that forward motion. And on those days that you didn't have guests, the ones with these facing pews, often the slaves that came with you to help you make the trip down came in here when it was cold or hot or whatever. They came in. There were also benches occasionally put on the front up here for them to sit on as well. People come and they expect to see ancient stones here and everything like you see in Charleston and Georgetown. There's no mainly modern graves out here. My friend and cousin Jack Leland came to church here, and he decided he wanted to be buried out there. And he put up a little sign one day. It was just a little skinny post about like that, stood about this high, and had a 4-inch slat across the top with a point on the end, and he painted it white, and he hand-lettered, "Future home of Jack Leland." And the man found out he had cancer and was not going to make it. And he would come to Brick Church service one time on a walker. He came in a wheelchair. The next time he walked in like there wasn't a thing in the world wrong with him. And then he went back to crutches again. And then he died. But before he did, I took him out there at one service. I said, "Jack, you've got to look at your sign. It's troubling." And I took him over, and the sign had just kind of drooped and drooped and drooped, and it was pointing down. And I said, "Jack, look at that." And he says, where the hell do you think I'm going? I said, apparently you just answered your own question. But he was a raconteur, and when we go out there, look at the foot of Jack's grave. It says, "Have one on Jack." When we have our services, the family brings a cooler with a white wine and a red wine and some glasses and some ice, and we toast our ancestors, and we toast Jack. He also left a little bit of money to the Brick Church Committee and to the church in McClellanville so that we can have a decent wine at communion. He says, "I'm so tired of that Walmart wine."
– 1847.
This is the resting place of Jonah Collins, sometime called John Collins. He came to this area from Barbados and settled at Tibwin Plantation 2 miles south of McClellanville. Your Forest Service owns it, and the house that was built there not by Jonah but by someone else is in bad need of repair. But your Forest Service seems to give the same answer to why haven't you done anything.
So we need to go do this.
Is that Marsh Deane Studio?
Stopped because we thought we had made a wrong. And then we left Lisa.
We got everybody?
Yes, we do.
You sure? You
Yep.
did a head count?
It's 15 of us. 2, 4, 6, 8, 9, 12, 13 there.
He also all right, now I'm going to tell you like I told some people earlier. There ain't no Baptist in this group. Sit up front. I'm not screaming today. I want you up front looking at us. Episcopal Chapel of Ease, a more convenient place to worship than the church we just came from. And it's true. When McClellanville was starting, Oak Street that you traveled on a minute ago was the boundary line between two properties. The McClellan family on this side of the street, the Morrisons on that side. And when the town started to grow a little bit, there were some boys on that side of the creek over there, stationed there during the Civil War. 500 troops were over there. To this day, nobody knows why. The speculation is they were put there in case of some emergency in Georgetown or Charleston. They could be almost there, but who knows? Nobody asked them. But when it was decided that McClellanville had grown enough to be a town and have a name, those boys asked, what do you call it? And nobody could respond. And of course, the McClellans wanted their name because they had been here longest. Mr. Morrison was the richest man in town. He owned plantations, that plantation, and a good number of properties outside of town. And then there were other contenders as well. And so some time passed, and they passed around the name of Jerryville, Estherville, after Mr. McClellan's wife, and none of them stuck because those boys over there started getting letters from home addressed to McClellanville. They named it. Didn't consult nobody, just started getting mail, and that's the way it stayed. Now, the McClellans are still very happy about that. But them Morrisons will give you a fight over it. They say we own as much as they had. But anyway, we like McClellanville. McClellans came here from Williamsburg County. Original McClellan was up there. He was a carpenter. He built a little church at Indiantown along with some other people. And then he came into McClellanville, and he was enterprising, so he was a planter. He did tar and turpentine. He did lumber business. He did everything. Next generations were shopkeepers and planters. And when you go to T.W. Graham's, you're sitting where a general merchandise store once operated for Thomas William Graham and his son Thomas William Graham and another son. And then next to that they had a hardware store. Next to that they had a mortuary. Next to that they had another business, and I can't recall what it was right now, but it don't matter. It ain't there no way. But that was our busy downtown you pass through. It's kind of quiet now. T.W. Graham's keeps some cars on the street for us, but it's quiet. We like it that way. But the families that first settled here were some of those planters off of the Santee River, and their descendants, and some people from Georgetown would come up here to go fishing and all. Every time you read the old articles, so-and-so from Georgetown is visiting, he and his family are staying with cousin so-and-so. We have ties in both directions. As Jack Leland said, we're all related in McClellanville, either through the front door or the back door. You cannot marry your sister or your cousin all the time. And it's true. But when it was decided we needed a church here, my great-great-granddaddy, who the plaque is dedicated to there, he preached when there wasn't a minister. He was pretty good when I read some writings about his quality sermons. He was pretty good. So I come by my gift to Gab quite honestly. He was a good man. He came into this town off of the Santee. He put $350 down on a piece of property called the Cottage, a little small plantation property, almost at the Santee Coastal Reserve today. And after a while, his wife had died, and he was tired of being out there in the middle of nowhere. He wasn't a planter, if you figured that out pretty quick. He was a doctor. And so he moved into town and wrote a letter to the Belucases and asked to be forgiven of his debt. He just wanted to get out with what he had spent. And the Lucases were down on their luck a little bit after the war too, and one of them was over in California trying to regroup a fortune so he could hold on some of his family land here. And he wrote his brother William, that was living here at the time, he got the letter from Dr. Baker and says, forgive the debt, give him his money back. So he got his $350 back. Today, ain't no way that would happen. Philadelphia lawyers have been mixed up in that. But he gave the man his starting expenses for this place, and when Hugo came, he left his home in the middle of the night in a roaring storm, wind blowing like crazy and water everywhere. And he came over to this church and he opened all the windows and let the water in. And that's the reason this church still stands relatively untouched. The only real damage, big damage, was the floors buckled right in the center. Warren came over the next day with his chainsaw and cut a chunk out of the middle of the floor so it lay back down. Put some boards in there that kind of go ziggy-zaggy down the front, and we ordered a red carpet to cover it up so you can't see our mess. But it made it through Hugo, and a lot of our homes did not. A lot of them were altered, but a great number of the old houses survived and have been rebuilt very much to what was there. Very few changes were made. Everybody's proud of what they have here, and they keep it up pretty good. We're getting new people that are moving in here now, and they're buying some of these old places, and they're the ones that can afford them now. The local people can't afford to live in the big houses anymore. So times are changing. By the time I'm gone, it's going to be a lot more change, because I don't plan on checking out anytime soon. So I'm going to get to watch some more of it. But I just hope that the town can survive new people with new ideas. You don't want to live in the past forever, but you got to remember the past brought you to the present, and you ought to respect things and traditions of home building and style and the look of the place are important to us. Some other people come and they want to buy a piece of property now, and then as soon as they buy it, they come before the architectural review board and ask to tear it down. And you know what we tell them? They tell them, right out there at the blinking light, that's where you want to take, a right or a left. Hit the road. We ain't taking no houses down. They were here when you came, they will be here when you're gone. So what you see is important when you ride through town. We are a village. I say it jokingly, but I really mean it. It's one of the few places left in South Carolina where you can turn your kids and your dog loose in the morning, they come home safely at night. I watch kids on bicycles, just 6, 7, 8 of them in a group, just flying down the street with their rod and reels across the handlebars going fishing. They were little girls and boys too. And it's a grand little community. When this was started, Pawleys Island was starting, Merle Inlet was starting, Mount Pleasant was starting. People were coming off their plantations to the coast, and it created a lot of towns. Somerville, another one. Beaufort was a popular place for weekenders. And so when you look into history of all of those places, you can take every resident and go right back to the nearest plantations. They didn't leave home very far. Santee is just down the road there, and these people had a second home here. They had a second home in Charleston too. And then some of them built a second home over there and built a third home here. But do you have any questions about the place?
What kind of wood is it?
It's cedar, a little cypress thrown in, and heart pine. And then it's got the American.
Yes, we are going. Am I gonna, I don't.
Oh, no.
Okay, we're gonna go make a right here and then take a left on the street.
This is so cute.
That's where we're gonna eat. Everything is seafood down here, babe.